Today we are going to talk about the key configuration that is required to have a 6 VPE working between a Juniper and any other device. In this example, I was trying to configure a 6 VPE session within a VRF, and what I noticed is that if you do not have certain specific configurations, you may end up having trouble in bringing up the BGP session. So just explaining what I have on my setup here. So I have a very basic VRF that is meant for IPv6 BGP session. So hence I call it the 6 VPE session. And you can see here the configuration is quite simple, like a standard VRF, instance type VRF. And I have a protocol BGP with the IPv6 neighboring session with IP unicast, family NLRI, INET6 unicast. Now the problem here I have is if you do not explicitly specify a router ID for the IPv6 session, the BGP session will not come up. So that is the key part that needs to be understood, because even though it's an IPv6 session, the router ID that is used is still a 32-bit integer value. So right now, if I do show BGP summary instance, my BGP is up inside the VRF and I have a couple of hundred routes that I have received. So let me quickly go and in my VRF, if I just deactivate the router ID configuration. So without the router ID, what really happens is the BGP is no longer going to come up, and you will start noticing that there will also be a message about bad BGP IDs. So let me clear the BGP here, just to show you that it's not going to come up. So I've cleared the BGP and I don't expect the BGP to come up. Now if I start checking on the log messages, you can see it starts telling that there is a bad BGP ID. Now you might have to be careful with this one, because this is quite commonly possible when you are trying to configure stuff. And if you have a BGP session for V6 on the global routing table, the router ID by default ends up being the loopback sometimes, depending on how it is set up. But for VRFs, it is quite important that you have this router options. Under routing options, you have your router ID defined. Because I have it inactive, that's why my BGP is not coming up, and you can see it's constantly dumping the message. So let me try to roll back my changes which I have done. So I have again activated my router ID configuration knob inside the VRF for 6 VPE, and now what I expect is my session should come up, and you can see the session is straight away up. So just a small point of reference that whenever you configure 6 VPE inside a VRF for an IPv6 session, please ensure that you also have a router ID defined, as it is the 32-bit integer that is used for V6 sessions. Just referencing that you need to ensure that the peer ID or the BGP ID is a 32-bit integer for a BGP session that is mainly based on IPv6. Here you can see that when I run show BGP neighbor, you see the peer ID, which in my case is Nixia, it's clearly having a 32-bit integer value. Likewise, as soon as you configured your local router ID inside the VRF, your local ID becomes a 32-bit integer value. So that is when the BGP session is going to form and establish. The moment I do not have this explicitly configured at my end, in this case Juniper, then the local ID cannot be derived, and that's when it starts reporting the bad BGP ID messages that we were seeing. Hope you find this useful. Bye for now.